I am 63 years old. My hands are rough. My back aches every morning when I wake up. My clothes are simple: a plain cotton shirt, worn trousers, and a pair of old brown sandals that I've had for nearly 8 years. I don't own a car. I don't carry a briefcase. I don't wear a watch that costs more than a month's groceries. To look at me, you would think I am nobody. And that day, standing outside the tall glass building in the middle of the city, with its shining steel letters and its perfectly dressed security guards, that is exactly what they thought too. Nobody? But here is what they did not know. That building, the one with the beautiful fountain at the entrance, the one where the name Hartwell and Associates was engraved in gold letters above the revolving doors. That building exists because of me, not because I am rich, not because I am powerful, but because 31 years ago I worked 7 days a week in a small printing shop so that my wife could go back to school, because I packed lunches for my children with my own hands while she studied past midnight, because I sold the one piece of land my father left me so she could start her first small business. I did all of that quietly, and then one day the world decided to laugh at me for it. But stay with me, because this story does not end where you think it does. My name is Gerald Owusu. I grew up in a small village outside of the city, the kind of place where people wake up before the sun and go to bed long after it disappears. My father was a farmer. My mother sold vegetables at the roadside market. We were not poor in spirit, but we had very little money. I came to the city at 19 years old with a small bag, $40 in my pocket, and a dream that I couldn't even fully describe yet. I got a job at a printing shop owned by an old man named Mr. Akampong. He was strict but fair. He taught me how to work with my hands, how to show up on time, how to treat customers with respect, no matter how they treated me. I worked there for 6 years, and by the time I was 25, I had saved enough money to rent a tiny room near the market. That is where I met Dorothy. She was 22 years old, studying business administration at the city college, working part-time at a stationery shop next door to our printing press. She used to come in sometimes to buy ink ribbons and paper rolls. She was quiet, serious. She wore glasses that were slightly too big for her face, and she always carried a thick notebook under her arm. The first time I spoke to her, I was terrified. I said, "Excuse me, you always look like you're solving a problem that nobody else can see." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "That's because I usually am." I was in love immediately. We courted for 2 years. Her family was not sure about me. I was a simple printing shop worker with no university degree, no family connections, no impressive title. Her father pulled me aside once and said, "Gerald, my daughter is going to be something great. Can a man like you keep up with that?" I told him, "I don't want to keep up with her, sir. I want to stand beside her." He didn't say anything, but I saw something shift in his eyes. Dorothy and I got married in a small church ceremony. We had 40 guests. The reception was in her aunt's yard, and we danced on the grass. It was the best day of my life. The early years of our marriage were not easy. Dorothy wanted to finish her degree, then go further, get her master's, then her MBA. She had a vision. She could see a future that I couldn't always see clearly, but I believed in her vision completely. That was enough, so I worked. I worked at the printing shop during the day. In the evenings, I took on a second job doing deliveries for a wholesale supplier. On weekends, I fixed neighbors' appliances, painted houses, did whatever was needed. Every cedis, every naira, every coin I made, I brought it home and put it on the table. "This is for your books." I would tell her, "Gerald, you're going to collapse." She would say, worried, "I'll rest when you graduate." I told her, Then it'll be your turn to worry about the bills." She laughed. She always laughed at that. But she also cried sometimes, late at night, when she thought I was asleep. I could hear her in the next room, quietly weeping, I think from a mixture of gratitude and guilt. She didn't like depending on me. She was too proud for that. But I never made her feel small for it. Never, not once. We had 2 children during those years. First came our son, Emmanuel, then our daughter, Patricia. They grew up watching their mother study and their father work. I hope it taught them something. I believed it would. When Emmanuel was 4 and Patricia was 2, I sold the piece of land my father had left me. It was 3 acres near the village. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was enough to help Dorothy start her first small business, a small marketing and printing consultancy that she ran from our living room. "Are you sure?" she asked me when I handed her the money. "Gerald, that land was from your father. My father wanted me to have a good life," I told her. "You are my good life, so I'm spending it correctly." She held my face in her hands that day and looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I wish I could go back to that moment. I would stay there for a very long time. Dorothy was brilliant. There is no other word for it. Once she had the tools and the space to work, she moved like a woman who had been waiting her entire life for the starting gun. Within 3 years, her consultancy had 10 clients. Within 6 years, she had expanded to a full agency with 20 employees. Within a decade, Hartwell and Associates, named after a combination of her MBA mentor's name and her own business philosophy, was one of the top marketing and corporate strategy firms in the country. She was featured in magazines. She was invited to give speeches. She was awarded Business Leader of the Year by a prominent industry group. She flew to conferences in other countries. She met presidents and ministers and CEO of international companies. And I retired from the printing shop at 58 after 30-something years of working with my hands. My back was not good. My knees ached constantly. The doctor told me I needed to rest, so I stayed home. I cooked, I cleaned, I tended the small garden in our backyard, tomatoes, peppers, a few herbs. I was at peace with it. I had never needed the spotlight. I had only ever needed to know that the people I loved were safe and well. But somewhere in those years of Dorothy's rising success, I noticed something, a distance, not from Dorothy herself. She still came home to me every evening. She still sat across from me at dinner. She still held my hand in church on Sunday mornings. Dorothy never changed toward me, but the world around her did, and some of the people closest to her, they changed too. Emmanuel, our son, had done well for himself. He was 34 years old, an investment analyst at a private firm. He wore expensive suits and drove a car that I couldn't name. He married a woman named Celestine, beautiful, sharp-tongued, and very aware of her own position in any room she entered. Celestine was not a bad person, but she was the kind of person who sorted people into categories: useful and not useful, impressive and not impressive, and very early in our relationship, she had placed me firmly in the not impressive column. The comments were always small, always said with a smile. At a family dinner once, I served the food because I had cooked, and Celestine looked at her husband and said, "Your father is so domestic," the way she said it, like it was something to be pitied. Emmanuel laughed and said nothing. At another gathering, Dorothy's company had just been ranked among the top 50 firms in the country. The family was celebrating. Someone raised a toast and said, "To Dorothy, the woman who built an empire." Everyone cheered, and Celestine leaned over to her sister and said not quietly enough, "It's amazing what she accomplished, especially considering what she had at home to work with." I heard it. I said nothing. I went to the kitchen and washed dishes. My daughter Patricia was different. She was warmer, more like her mother. But she lived far away. She had married and moved to another city, and so she was not often around to see what was happening. The one who was always around was Emmanuel, and Emmanuel had slowly, without perhaps even realizing it, begun to look at me the way Celestine did, like I was furniture, like I was background, like I was the old, simple man who had married above himself and was now just. There, he never said it directly, but respect is not only in words. It is in the way someone looks at you. It is in whether they ask your opinion. It is in whether they introduce you with pride or apology. Emmanuel introduced me with apology. This is my father. He's retired. He likes gardening. Not, this is my father. He's the reason my mother has everything she has. Just gardening. I said nothing. One Thursday morning in October, Dorothy left for work early, as she always did. She kissed my cheek at the door, told me not to forget my blood pressure medication, and said she would be home by 7. I watched her get into her company car, a sleek black vehicle with a driver who had been working for her for 6 years, and I went back inside to have my tea. By mid-morning, I realized she had forgotten something. On the kitchen counter, next to the fruit bowl, was a small velvet pouch. Inside was a pair of earrings, gold, with small green stones, that had belonged to her late mother. Dorothy had mentioned the day before that she wanted to wear them to a board meeting that afternoon. It was an important meeting, she had said, a potential merger with an international firm. She wanted to feel connected to her mother for it. She had forgotten them. I held the pouch in my hand for a moment, then made my decision. I would bring them to her. I put on my cleanest shirt, a blue cotton one with small white checks, my worn trousers, my old brown sandals. I combed my hair carefully. I found the address of the main office. I had only been there twice in 5 years, both times for company events that required spouses, and I took a bus into the city. I am not one for taxis, old habits. The city was busy, as it always is. I arrived at the building on Crescent Boulevard just before noon. It was an impressive building, tall and glass, fronted, reflecting the clouds above. The fountain at the entrance was running. 2 security guards stood at the main gate, both of them young, both in neat dark uniforms. I approached the gate with the velvet pouch in my hand. One of the guards, a stocky young man with a wide jaw and a bored expression, held up his hand. "Authorized personnel only, sir," he said. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need an appointment," I said quietly. "I'm here to see my wife. She's the CEO of this company." There was a pause, and then the guard laughed, not a small, polite laugh, a real laugh. He turned to his colleague, a taller man who was leaning against the gatehouse, and said something in a low voice. The other guard glanced at me and smiled too. "Sir," the stocky guard said, composing himself, "I see the CEO husband every day, in fact." He pointed past me toward the parking area. "There he is, coming out right now." I turned slowly. Walking toward the gate from the parking area was a man. Mid-40s, dressed dark blazer, polished shoes, a phone pressed to his ear. He was tall, broad, shouldered, and he walked with the easy confidence of someone who belongs everywhere he goes. He glanced at me as he passed, barely a second, the way people look at strangers on the street, and he walked through the gate, which the guard immediately opened for him, got into a waiting car, and drove away. I stood there, very still. The guard was watching me with an amused expression, waiting to see what I would do. I did something he didn't expect. I smiled. "I see," I said. And then, because God has a way of writing stories better than any of us can plan, I took out my phone and I called Dorothy. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Gerald, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," I said. My voice was calm. I had spent 63 years practicing calm. "I came to bring your mother's earrings. You left them on the counter." A pause. "Oh, Gerald." Her voice softened immediately. "You didn't have to come all this way. I would have managed." "I know you would have," I said. "But I wanted you to have them for your meeting. I know what they mean to you." Another pause, longer this time. "Where are you?" "I'm at the gate." "The gate? Why didn't they let you in?" "Hold on." I heard her voice change, that switch she made from wife to executive, and she said to someone in the background, "Someone tell reception that my husband is at the gate. Let him in immediately." I waited. 30 seconds later, a different security officer, a woman, older, with a serious face, came out of a side door and walked toward me with purpose. "Mr. Owusu, I'm so sorry for the wait. Please come with me." I followed her inside. As we passed through the gate, I noticed the first guard, the stocky one who had laughed, watching me with a very different expression now. Confused, something else in his eyes too. I didn't stop to let him figure it out. Inside the building, I was taken to a reception area that was large and cool, decorated with the kind of restrained elegance that speaks of real money. A receptionist made a call. Another staff member offered me water. 5 minutes later, Dorothy came down herself. She was dressed in a deep burgundy suit, her hair pulled back, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was still beautiful, more beautiful, I thought, because of the confidence she wore now, the authority that had grown around her over the years like a second skin. She walked straight to me and hugged me. Not a polite hug, a real one, the kind she had always given me, that hadn't changed in 31 years. "You took the bus here, didn't you?" she murmured into my shoulder. "I like the bus," I said. She pulled back and looked at me, and I saw something in her face, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name in that moment. I know what it was now. I'll tell you later. She took the velvet pouch from my hand, opened it, and held her mother's earrings carefully. "Thank you," she said. "Gerald, thank you. Your meeting." I said, "Don't be late." She laughed. "Come, let me show you to my office. I'll have someone get you lunch while I'm in the meeting. Then we can ride home together this evening. I don't want to disturb Gerald." She gave me the look she had been giving me for 31 years. Patient, warm, allowing no argument. "Come." So I went. Her office was on the 14th floor. Ceiling windows, a long conference table, shelves of books and awards. On her desk, in a simple wooden frame, was a photograph I recognized, our wedding photo, the one where we were dancing on her aunt's grass, both of us laughing at something someone had said. My tie was crooked. Her dress was simple white cotton. It was the only personal photograph on her desk. While she was in her meeting, a staff member brought me a plate of food and a cup of tea, and I sat in a comfortable chair near the window and looked out at the city below. And then the assistant, a young woman named Grace, made a mistake that she didn't know she was making. She left a folder on Dorothy's desk, and as she placed it down, some papers slipped out and scattered toward my chair. I reached to help collect them, and as I gathered them, something caught my eye. A name on a document. A name and a title. Victor Hartwell, Strategic Partner and Acting Ambassador. Hartwell and Associates. Victor Hartwell. The name on the building, the man I had seen in the parking lot. I looked at the document more carefully. It was a company profile, the kind used for board presentations. Victor Hartwell, age 47. Background, MBA from London, 15 years in corporate consultancy. Role, co-founder and strategic director. And at the bottom of the profile, a small notation that the general public wouldn't think twice about, but that hit me like cold water on a still morning. Emergency contact. Dorothy Owusu Hartwell. Owusu Hartwell, not Owusu. Not Dorothy Owusu, which was her legal name, which was the name on our marriage certificate, which was the name I had heard her use her entire career. Owusu Hartwell. I set the papers down carefully. I placed them back in the folder. I folded my hands in my lap. And I sat there in the quiet office on the 14th floor, looking out at the city below, and I thought very clearly about a number of things. I thought about the guard at the gate who had said, "I see her husband every day." I thought about Victor Hartwell walking through that gate with the easy confidence of someone who belongs. I thought about the distance I had noticed in recent years, not from Dorothy. She had always been present with me, but something around her, something in the edges of her world that I could never quite see into. I thought about the name on the building, and then I made a decision. I would not say anything, not yet, not until I understood the full shape of what I was seeing, because I am an old man who has worked with my hands his entire life. And one thing working with your hands teaches you is this: before you decide that something is broken, you make sure you understand how it is supposed to work. Dorothy and I rode home together that evening in the company car. She talked about her meeting. The merger negotiations were going well, she said. The other firm was serious, and the terms were fair. She was pleased. I listened. I asked questions in the right places. I nodded. Then gently I said, "I saw Victor Hartwell today in the parking lot." Dorothy paused mid-sentence. It was a small pause, a fraction of a second, but I had been watching her face for 31 years, and I saw it. "Did you?" she said. "The guards know him very well." I said simply. Silence. We were at a red light. The driver kept his eyes forward. "Gerald," Dorothy started. "He's the name on the building," I said. "Yes, he's my co-founder. I've mentioned him before." "You have," I agreed. "But I don't think you've mentioned that your professional name includes his." Another pause. And then Dorothy turned to look at me fully, which was something she always did when she was about to be completely honest, because she had never been a person who could tell the truth while looking away. "I used Owusu Hartwell on some international documents," she said quietly. "The hyphenated name tested better in certain markets. It's a professional branding decision. I should have told you." I looked at her. She held my gaze. I thought about what I had seen in that folder. I thought about what the guard had said. I thought about the way Victor Hartwell walked like a man who knew his place in a building. And I thought about my wife's face as she looked at me, open, direct, a little afraid. Not afraid of being caught, afraid of hurting me. "Okay," I said. "Gerald, I believe you," I said. "About the branding, but—" I was quiet for a moment. "The guard thought he was your husband," I said. "That's all I'm saying." Dorothy was silent for a long time. Then she said, "He comes and goes frequently. He's in and out of the building constantly. Some of the newer guards don't know." "It's all right," I said. "It's not all right," she said, and her voice was tight in a way that told me she was more upset than she was showing. "I'm going to speak to the security team, Dorothy," I said. "It's all right." She looked at me, and I saw it, that flicker again. The thing in her face from this morning, when she had hugged me in the lobby. Guilt. Not the guilt of a woman who has done something terrible. The guilt of a woman who knows that her world has become something that her husband cannot always enter. That her success has built walls around her that, no matter how much she loves him, sometimes keep him out. That the man who gave everything, the land, the years, the coins on the table, is now mistaken for a stranger at the gate of the building he helped build. That was what I saw, and it broke my heart, not because of Dorothy, but because of what it meant. I might have let it all rest quietly. I am good at quiet. But 3 days later, Emmanuel came to the house. He had heard, from his mother, I assume, or perhaps from someone at the company, about my visit to the office. And he had drawn his own conclusions, the way his wife had trained him to draw conclusions. Quickly, sharply, without asking for the full story first. He sat across from me at the kitchen table while Dorothy was upstairs, and he said, "Papa, I need to talk to you about what happened at Mama's office." "All right," I said. "You embarrassed her," he said, "showing up unannounced like that, in those clothes, taking the bus. The guards didn't even recognize you. Do you know how that looks, a woman of her position? I brought her mother's earrings, I said. He blinked. What? She forgot her mother's earrings. She wanted them for an important meeting. I brought them to her. Emmanuel was quiet for a moment. Then he pressed on. Still, Papa, people have phones. You could have called someone at the office. You didn't need to show up personally and cause a scene at the gate. I didn't cause a scene. I said, the guard thought you were some random visitor. I was unexpected. I said, that's different from random, Papa. He lowered his voice, the way people do when they want to sound gentle while saying something cutting. Mama has worked very hard to build a certain image, a certain reputation. She can't have her husband wandering in off the street in sandals that look like they're from 2008, confusing security staff. It's not good for her. I looked at my son. I looked at him for a long time. This boy that I had held in my arms in the hospital 34 years ago. This boy that I had walked to school every morning for 6 years, holding his small hand in mine. This boy that I had sat beside at a kitchen table just like this one, helping him with mathematics problems until 11 o'clock at night. This boy that I had cried for silently in my car the first time he left for university, because the house felt so empty without him. He was looking at me with the expression of a man explaining something to someone who doesn't fully understand. I said nothing. He took my silence as agreement, the way people always did. I'm just saying. He continued, maybe it's better if you call ahead next time. Or better yet, don't go to the office at all unless you're invited for a specific event. It'll be easier for everyone. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and went upstairs to see his mother. I sat at the kitchen table. I thought about a young man of 25, working double shifts, setting aside coins in a tin on the shelf, selling his father's land, washing dishes at midnight, walking in old sandals because every settee that could be saved was a settee that went to the future. I thought about how that young man had looked at his wife and said, I don't want to keep up with you. I want to stand beside you. And then I thought about what that young man had built with his rough hands, his quiet dignity, his 30 years of showing up, and where he was now. Being told not to visit his wife at the building he helped her build. I didn't cry. I got up. I went to the garden. I watered my tomatoes. A week later, Dorothy was going through some old documents in the storage room. We were looking for our property papers for a legal matter, and she found a box. Not just any box. It was an old biscuit tin, the kind with a rounded lid, dark green with faded gold lettering. I had kept it on the top shelf of the storage room for years. I had forgotten she didn't know about it. She brought it to the living room and set it on the coffee table. Gerald, what is this? Old things, I said. Can I open it? I looked at the tin, then I nodded. She sat down on the sofa and lifted the lid. Inside the tin was a record of my life. Every pay slip from every job I'd worked since I was 19. Bank statements going back to when Dorothy was still in school. Receipts for school fees, for textbooks, for medical bills, for the lease on her first office, for equipment she had needed for her consultancy in the early years. A folded document, the sale agreement for my father's land, and at the bottom, a small notebook. She opened it. My handwriting neat despite my rough hands, because I had always cared about neatness even in small things. And in the notebook, column after column of numbers, every amount I had saved and given to Dorothy's education and business over the years. Every sacrifice, documented quietly, privately, not for any purpose other than my own habit of keeping records. The total at the bottom of the last page, the sum of everything I had given to her future over the first 15 years of our marriage, was a number she had never seen before. Because I had never told her, Dorothy sat with the notebook in her hands for a very long time. She didn't cry immediately. She read slowly, turning pages, reading dates, reading amounts, reading the careful, quiet documentation of a man who had given everything and asked for nothing. Then she got to the last page. There was an entry dated the month of our wedding anniversary, 22 years ago. Just one line, not a number, a sentence written in my handwriting. I would do it all again. Dorothy closed the notebook, and she cried, not politely, not quietly. She cried the way people cry when something breaks open inside them that has been under pressure for a very long time. She held the notebook against her chest, and she cried with her whole body. I sat beside her. I put my hand on her back. I said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The notebook had already said it. Dorothy called Emmanuel that same evening. I heard her on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was quiet and controlled, the CO voice, not the wife voice, and she asked him to come to the house the following Saturday. She said she had something she needed to share with the family. He came with Celestine. Patricia had been called too, and she drove in from the other city, a 4-hour journey, because when Dorothy Owusu calls and says it is important, you come. We sat in the living room. Dorothy had placed the tin on the coffee table. Beside it, the notebook. She let everyone settle. Then she said, I want to tell you all something about your father. Something I should have said a long time ago. Something I should have been saying every day. She told them. She didn't read from the notebook. She had memorized enough of it to speak from her heart. She told them about the pay slips, the savings, the double shifts, the land, the money that had become her first office lease, her first equipment, her first everything. She told them about the tin on the shelf that she had never known existed, 30 years of quiet record, keeping by a man who had never once demanded to be acknowledged. The room was very still. Celestine had stopped moving. She was looking at the coffee table. Emmanuel was very pale. Patricia had started crying almost immediately, but silently, pressing her fingers over her mouth. Then Dorothy said, when your father came to my office last week, the guard at the gate told him he couldn't be my husband because he sees my husband every day. He was talking about Victor Hartwell, who comes and goes from the building frequently. She paused. Your father stood at that gate and was laughed at. And then he came upstairs and handed me my mother's earrings with a smile, sat in my office, ate lunch quietly, and rode home without making me feel guilty for even a moment. Emmanuel made a sound, something between a word and a breath. I also understand. Dorothy continued that earlier this week, you sat at this kitchen table and told your father that he embarrassed me by coming to my office, that he should dress better, that he should call ahead, that perhaps he shouldn't come unless invited. The room was completely silent. Emmanuel, she said, do you know what this building is? She touched the notebook. Do you know what my company is built on? Emmanuel looked at his father. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time as an adult, he really looked at me, not at my clothes, not at my sandals, not at the unimpressive surface of a retired old man who likes gardening, at me. At the person behind all of it. Papa, he started. I don't need an apology. I said quietly, I never needed one. I didn't know, he said. You didn't ask? I said, simply, without anger. That was the worst part for him, I think. Not that I was angry. That I wasn't. Celestine was very quiet for a long time. Then she said, in a voice I had never heard from her before, small, stripped of its usual sharpness, Mr. Owusu, I owe you an enormous apology. I looked at her. I've said things, she said, over the years, things I thought were funny or private. They weren't kind, and I was wrong. She was looking at the table when she said it, but then she made herself look at me. I am sorry, she said. I nodded. Thank you, I said. Patricia came and knelt beside my chair like a child again, and rested her head on my knee, and just stayed there, the way she used to when she was small, and the world had been too much for her. I put my hand on her head. In the months that followed, things changed, not dramatically, not with grand gestures. Real change rarely looks like the movies. but Emmanuel began calling me more, not just to check in, to talk, to ask questions about the early years, about his mother's beginnings, about my own life, my father, the village, the printing shop. He had never asked before. We sat together on the veranda on weekends, and I told him things I had never told anyone, about the nights I was afraid, about the times I wasn't sure we would make it, about the moment I signed the papers for my father's land and sat alone in the car and spoke to my father's spirit and said, "I hope you understand, Papa. I'm using it for something worth it." Emmanuel listened, really listened, and I watched something grow in him, something that had perhaps always been there, but had been buried under Celestine's categories and the weight of his expensive suits. He called me one evening, about 6 months after that Saturday. "Papa," he said, "yes, I introduced you at a company dinner last night. Oh, I told them you built everything my mother has. I told them what you did. I told them the full story. I was quiet. They were very moved." He said, "Good." I said, "I was very proud." He said, telling it, I was so proud of you, Papa." I had to put the phone down for a moment, because even a man who is used to quiet has a heart that can be full. Dorothy told me later what happened at the office. She had spoken to the security team, as she said she would. She had briefed them on who I was. She had done it quietly, professionally, not to humiliate anyone, just to correct a mistake. But she also, I learned, had done something else. In the main lobby of Hartwell and Associates, on the wall beside the reception desk, there was now a display. A historical display about the founding of the company, the kind that tells the story of where something began. And in that display, alongside the photographs of board members and company milestones, there was a section titled, "The Foundation." It was about me, about a printing shop worker, about a tin of savings, about a piece of land, about the man who stood beside a woman for 30 years while she became everything she believed she could be. Dorothy told me about it first, and then took me to see it herself. I stood in front of it for a long time. The stocky guard, the one who had laughed at the gate, was on duty that day. I passed him on my way in. He saw me. He recognized me. He stood very straight. "Good morning, Mr. Owusu," he said. His voice was different from before. Careful, respectful, "Good morning," I said, and I smiled at him, genuinely, because I am not a man who carries grudges. They are too heavy for these old knees. He nodded, and I walked through the gate of the building that my wife built, that exists in part because of me, that now carries a piece of my story on its lobby wall. And I went upstairs to have lunch with Dorothy. I am 60, 3 years old. My hands are still rough. My back still aches in the morning. I still wear the same sandals. I bought a new pair, eventually, but I chose the same kind because I like them. I don't need a title. I don't need a car, or a briefcase, or a nameplate on a door. What I need, what I have always needed, I have had all along. A woman who knows what I gave, children who, even late, came to understand, a quiet life that, when you look at it closely, is anything but small. Here is what I want you to hear. If you are listening to this story and you have someone in your life, a parent, a spouse, a quiet soul who works without asking for applause, look at them carefully. Look past the worn sandals. Look past the simple shirt. Look past the fact that they don't speak loudly in rooms, that they don't demand credit, that they are so comfortable with humility that you have mistaken it for lack of worth. Look at what they have given. Look at the land they sold, the sleep they sacrificed, the meals they cooked so someone else could study, the coins they saved and placed on the table without ceremony. Because here is the truth, and it is a truth that Emmanuel now knows, that Celestine now knows, that the guard at the gate now knows. The loudest person in the room is not always the most important one. The most powerful foundation is often the one you cannot see, and the person most worth honoring is frequently the one you took for granted the longest. Don't wait for a notebook in a tin to tell you. Don't wait until someone stands at a gate and gets laughed at. Don't wait for the story to have to be put on a wall before you recognize it. Look around you right now. That quiet person, that humble one, that man or woman who shows up without fanfare and gives without keeping score, that is the person who is holding everything together. Go and tell them you see them. Today, not tomorrow. Today?